The contract was placed in front of Marlene Dietrich in 1930, just after she finished filming The Blue Angel. She was 28, about to board a ship to America, about to become the highest-paid actress at Paramount Pictures. The document granted her husband, Rudolf Sieber, legal authority to manage her earnings. All of them. Every dollar she would ever make. She signed it. She would not remember signing it. She would not remember anyone explaining what it meant. What it meant was that the fortune generated by her face, her body, her voice, and her discipline would flow into a legal structure she did not control. She was not the owner of her labor. She was the beneficiary of an allowance. The architecture of Weimar Berlin's marriage laws, Hollywood's studio system, and a husband's legal primacy had enclosed her so completely that she did not know she was inside a cage until 14 years later, when a financial advisor told her she was not wealthy. She was managed. The rule was never spoken aloud: a wife's revenue is a family asset, and a family asset is administered by the husband. She was supposed to already know. She didn't. How was she supposed to know? And who wrote a rule like that? To enter the system, a woman had to be something a man of rank could display. The raw material mattered less than its malleability. She had to arrive preformed for refinement, already disciplined, already hungry, already willing to be altered. Maria Magdalene Dietrich arrived exactly that way. She was born on December 27, 1901, in Schöneberg, a district of Berlin where Prussian virtue was not a philosophy but an atmosphere: pressed linen, polished silver, and silence. Her father, Louis Erich Otto Dietrich, was a police lieutenant. He died in 1907, when she was 6. Her mother, Wilhelmina, married Eduard von Losch, a colonel in the German Imperial Army, in 1914. He died in 1916 from wounds sustained during the First World War. The child was raised in a succession of absences, trained that emotion was a private matter and duty was a public one. She studied violin at the August Victoria Schule, practicing until her wrists ached. She was going to be a concert violinist. A wrist injury, the exact nature unclear in the record, though some sources suggest tendinitis ended that future. One door closed. Another opened, or was opened for her, by the cultural machinery of Weimar Berlin, hungry for new faces. She auditioned for Max Reinhardt's acting school at the Deutsches Theater in 1921. She was accepted. Small parts, chorus work, silent films. On May 17, 1923, she married Rudolf Sieber, an assistant director she had met on a film set. The marriage was affectionate, practical, and soon platonic. A daughter, Maria Elizabeth, was born on December 13, 1924. The rule of entry had been satisfied. She was a wife, a mother, respectable. The family photograph was taken. It would be useful later. Then Joseph von Sternberg saw her. He was casting The Blue Angel in 1929. He needed a woman who could degrade a man with a song. He saw Dietrich in a review called Zwei Krauten at the Berliner Theater. He screen-tested her. She was insolent, bored, luminous. The camera loved her or she made it love her. The distinction is meaningless. She got the part. She played Lola Lola, the cabaret singer who turns a respectable professor into a cuckolded wreck. The film premiered on April 1, 1930, at the Gloria Palast. That night, she boarded the SS Bremen for America with a Paramount contract, a suitcase, and a child. Her husband stayed in Berlin. The raw material had been extracted from one continent and imported to another for refinement. The rule of entry now demanded total physical re-engineering. Von Sternberg told her she was too heavy. She starved herself. Her cheekbones were not prominent enough. According to her daughter Maria Riva's 1992 biography, Dietrich had her back molars removed to hollow the space beneath her cheekbones, a documented procedure, though the precise medical reasoning remains debated among scholars. The face you see in asterisk Morocco asterisk 1930, asterisk Shanghai Express asterisk 1932, asterisk Blonde Venus asterisk 1932. The architecture of shadow and light that made her the most photographed woman in the world was sculpted, not merely inherited. She reshaped her eyebrows. She learned to light herself. She designed her own costumes with Paramount's head designer Travis Banton. She submitted to the camera like a collaborator, not a subject. The rules said, alter yourself until you are suitable for display. She did. The cost was a permanent separation between the woman and the image. The image became a product. The product had market value. The woman became the factory, and the factory does not own what it makes. The rule of silence was not a single prohibition. It was a reticulated structure of omissions, each necessary to maintain a different sector of the apparatus that depended on her. The first silence concerned her marriage. Rudolf Sieber remained her legal husband until his death on June 24, 1976. He lived for decades with Tamara Madel, a Russian émigré Dietrich had originally hired as a secretary. Dietrich purchased a house in the San Fernando Valley where Sieber and Madel lived together. She visited. She referred to Rudolf as her husband and Tamara as his companion. The arrangement was financially convenient. Legally necessary divorce would have complicated the tax structures and the child's legal status and never publicly acknowledged. To speak of it would have admitted that the Dietrich marriage was a legal fiction maintained for structural purposes. The press did not ask. The studio publicity department did not volunteer. The apparatus required the appearance of romantic availability, the siren, the temptress, the unattainable woman who might choose you. A husband in California with a mistress was a narrative complication no one wanted. So the husband became a ghost. The silence held up the roof. The second silence concerned her lovers. Maurice Chevalier, during the Smiling Lieutenant in 1931. Gary Cooper, on the set of Morocco John Gilbert, the silent film star, a brief but intense affair. Jean Gabin, the French actor, her most significant romantic relationship of the middle years. They lived together in the early 1940s. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. On the women's side, Mercedes de Acosta, the playwright whose 1960 memoir Here Lies the Heart thinly veiled her relationships with Dietrich, Garbo, and others. The wife of a Spanish politician whose identity Dietrich guarded. According to multiple biographical sources, the daughter of a Hollywood censor, a relationship that, if confirmed, was a private rebellion against the very apparatus that policed her public image. Her bisexuality was an open secret on the Paramount lot. Hedda Hopper knew. Louella Parsons knew. The rule was, you may do as you please, provided you produce no evidence. No publishable letters. No public scenes. No confessions. To name the truth would trigger the morality clauses in her studio contract, clauses that gave Paramount the right to terminate her for moral turpitude. The legal apparatus did not distinguish between private conduct and public scandal. A whisper in the wrong column was a career-ending event. So she cultivated ambiguity. She wore the tuxedo in Morocco She kissed a woman on screen, a brief, startling moment audiences could interpret as performance, decadence, European eccentricity. Those who needed to understand the code understood it. No one spoke the words. The silence was survival technology. The third silence was political. She left Germany in 1930 and became an American citizen on March 6, 1939. The Nazi regime wanted her back. Joseph Goebbels personally courted her through intermediaries, offering a fortune in Reichsmarks to return and become Queen of German cinema. She refused with unambiguous finality. She gave concerts for the French war effort in 1939, singing for soldiers on the Maginot Line. Then, in 1944, she did something no other Hollywood star of her magnitude did. She joined the USO and went to the front. North Africa, Italy after Anzio, France after D-Day, Germany with the advancing Allied forces. She was at the Battle of the Bulge during the brutal winter of 1944–1945. She slept in foxholes. She contracted pneumonia. She entered Bergen-Belsen after its liberation on April 15, 1945, the camp where Anne Frank had died weeks earlier. She saw what the country of her birth had done. And when she returned to Hollywood, the rule of silence required her to package the experience into anecdotes. The American public, exhausted by war, wanted stories of bravery and band music. They did not want to hear about the children's shoes piled at Belsen. So she gave them what they wanted. She swallowed the atrocity. The apparatus needed a clean narrative, glamorous star sacrifices, comfort for democracy. Not, German woman watches her homeland consumed by a death cult and cannot speak of what she saw because the world has moved on and wants its fantasy back. That silence calcified. Decades later, she would dismiss the war work. It was my duty, she said, and changed the subject. The rule of silence had done its work. It taught her that some experiences cannot be narrated, not because they are secrets, but because no one is listening. The rule of loyalty demanded she protect the structures that depended on her, regardless of what they cost. The first structure was the legal marriage. Sieber was the signatory on her accounts, the legal administrator of her financial apparatus. When the IRS audited her in the late 1930s, when debts accumulated from years of generous spending and limited oversight, the legal architecture shielded him. She protected the marriage not from romantic devotion but because the marriage was a vessel holding the family unit, and the family unit contained her daughter Maria. Maria was the one person Dietrich loved with unambiguous ferocity. The loyalty was concentric: protect the husband to protect the name to protect the child at any cost. The second structure was Paramount Pictures. Von Sternberg directed 7 Dietrich films. By 1935, *The Devil is a Woman* had lost money and the collaboration ended. The studio paired her with other directors: Frank Borzage for *Desire*, 1936, Mitchell Leisen for *Midnight*, 1939, Ray and Wright for *The Spoilers*, 1942. She did what was asked. She wore the costumes, said the lines, submitted to the publicity machine. Her salary peaked at approximately $450,000 per film, making her one of the highest-paid women in America. But her financial arrangements, layered with loans, advances, management fees, and Sieber's legal authority, left her perennially short of liquid cash. She could not afford to stop working. The rule of loyalty meant, never make your employer regret their investment. A profitable asset is a protected asset. Protected, not free. The third structure was the United States military. She was the soldier's girl. General Patton requested her presence during the Sicilian campaign. She performed for men who had not seen a woman from home in months. She held the hands of the wounded in field hospitals. She sang Lily Marlene, the German song beloved on both sides of the front, in a voice that made hardened soldiers weep. She was awarded the Medal of Freedom on November 3, 1947. The loyalty required was total. She could not express what the war had cost her psychologically, because to express the cost would betray the narrative of noble sacrifice. So she remained the soldier's girl, frozen in that role for the rest of her public life. The apparatus rewarded loyalty with medals and left the wounds to heal or not in private. The cost was a species of loneliness difficult to describe. She was surrounded by people who loved an idea. The real woman, exhausted, cynical, cuttingly funny in private, pragmatic about her own mythology, capable of astonishing generosity and sudden coldness, had very few witnesses. The rule of loyalty isolated her inside the icon. The apparatus protected the icon. The icon protected the system. The woman paid in a currency no accountant could audit. No one understood the rule of appearance better than Marlene Dietrich. She was its greatest technician. She lit herself. She designed her own gowns bias cut silk that moved like water, tailored trousers that scandalized and captivated. The famous nude dress of 1936 constructed of illusion netting and strategically placed sequins. She knew the camera required a surface that reflected light at specific angles. Her face was a project spanning 5 decades. The cheekbones were structural. The lighting was existential. She once told a cinematographer, "If you can't light me, I'll light myself." She meant it literally. She traveled with enormous steamer trunks full of costumes, wigs, shoes, makeup, and lighting gels. She did her own fittings, working late into the night with seamstresses. She could look at a photograph and tell you the f-stop of the lens. The performance of glamour was not vanity. It was a full-time discipline, a skilled trade, a fortress constructed from silk and light and will. The public Dietrich was a product she manufactured daily. The apparatus depended on that product remaining flawless, ageless, desirable, and visibly grateful. She was required to perform gratitude in every interview. She did, mostly, deflecting praise with a Prussian shrug. "I'm a working woman," she would say, as if the legend were a shift she clocked into. The performance of dignity was mandatory. She could not complain, could not appear bitter, could not explain the financial betrayals, the emotional exhaustion, the lovers who left, the loneliness of hotel rooms in cities that blurred together. To do so would violate the central contract of stardom. The audience gives adoration, and you give them a fantasy unsoiled by ordinary human complaint. The records from the 1950s show her on stage in Las Vegas at the Sahara Hotel, where she debuted her cabaret act in December 1953. She is in her early 50s. The costumes are still spectacular: glass beads, ostrich feathers, the swan coat that weighed nearly 30 pounds. The figure is still remarkable. The audiences are full. The reviews are strong. The Sahara engagement broke attendance records. What the surviving documentation does not show is the toll of the maintenance, chronic insomnia dating to the war years, increasing dependence on scotch, sleeping pills to force rest, amphetamines to force performance. The punishing cycle: perform, collapse, chemically recover, perform again. The apparatus required a woman who could sing Falling in Love Again for the 5,000th time with the same arch which she had in 1930. The mask could never slip. It grew heavier as the decades accumulated. The woman beneath grew thinner, more brittle. The distance between the image and the self became an abyss. This is the moment where the rules begin to constrict. The silence, the loyalty, the performance. Each interlocks with the others, forming a structure with no obvious exit. If you have recognized a woman you know in these descriptions: a grandmother who performed contentment, an aunt who protected a man who did not protect her, a mother never told the financial truth of her own life, you are seeing the underlying architecture. These stories get buried because the apparatus depends on their invisibility. On this channel, we recover them. We name the mechanisms. If that work matters to you, I invite you to subscribe. The act of witnessing is a quiet refusal of the system that tried to erase them. The financial architecture of Marlene Dietrich's life was a masterpiece of invisible control. The rule of money stated, a woman of her stature was a corporation, and the corporation was a male trusteeship. She generated the revenue. She performed the labor: physical, emotional, aesthetic. The legal instruments governing the revenue were written and managed by men. The 1930 Paramount contract was generous by Depression-era standards. Script approval, lighting approval nearly unprecedented for a woman. A star dressing room. What she did not have was full legal control of her income. Sieber was her manager, business representative, financial signatory. Earnings flowed into accounts she did not directly administer. When she wanted to lend money, and she was notoriously generous, supporting a network of European refugees, struggling artists, and aging relatives who had fled the Nazis, she had to ask permission to access her own earnings. When she wanted to purchase property, agents executed the transaction. The woman generating millions in box office revenue was functionally illiquid, a conduit through which money passed on its way elsewhere. In the late 1930s, the IRS audited her for back taxes. She discovered the full extent of the entanglement. She was in debt. Her assets were tied up in structures she had not designed and barely understood. She had been working at an astonishing pace, 7 major films in 7 years, and had remarkably little to show for it in accessible wealth. The money had moved through her. She was the channel, not the reservoir. During the war, she drew no USO salary. She was a volunteer. She spent what she could access on uniforms, travel, medical supplies, and support for the network of refugees depending on her. Her financial situation deteriorated further. In the 1950s, facing an industry that had moved on to younger stars, she engineered a reinvention. She became a cabaret singer. She hired Burt Bacharach as musical director. He worked with her from 1957 to 1964, creating the sophisticated arrangements that defined her stage act. She learned to command a room alone. The money from live shows was substantial. Her Las Vegas engagements commanded top fees. But the rule of money followed her into the nightclubs. She was the product, and the product had to be maintained. The costumes, each gown a small fortune in beadwork and fabric, came from her pocket. The entourage of musical director, arranger, conductor, secretary, and publicity took percentages from the gross. She was still supporting Rudolph and Tamara in the Valley House. She supported Maria, now an actress working sporadically, and Maria's husband William Riva, and their 4 sons. She supported the image, and the image required constant financial infusion. The investment consumed the returns. She worked because she had to work. The system was elegant. She was never locked in a room. She was locked inside obligations that required her to keep performing until her body failed. In 1964, she fell off a stage in Germany. In 1965, peripheral vascular disease was diagnosed. She kept working. In 1973, at the Shady Grove Music Fair in Maryland, she fell again. The left femur fractured. Recovery was slow and incomplete. She was 71. The bookings evaporated. The rule of money had a final clause: when the product can no longer generate reliable revenue, the system discards it. She spent her final years at 12 Avenue Montaigne in Paris, bills paid by residual royalties carefully managed by her daughter, now her legal and financial guardian. She had been one of the most famous women on the planet. She died without a significant personal fortune. The apparatus had extracted its value. The product was retired. The woman was left with memories, trunks of costumes in storage, and a telephone that rang less often each year. The financial depletion was not merely economic. It was the foundation on which the next rule was built. A mother without independent wealth cannot provide for her child as she imagined. The rule of money flowed directly into the rule of motherhood. There, the emotional cost became intergenerational. The rule of motherhood was the most contradictory of all. It demanded her primary duty be to her child, except when duty to career, husband, or image took precedence. It demanded total devotion and total availability, even as the other rules, money, silence, appearance, made both impossible. She navigated this with determination that was fierce, flawed, and deeply human. Maria Elizabeth Sieber was born December 13, 1924, in Berlin. When Dietrich left for Hollywood in April 1930, she brought the 5-year-old on the SS Bremen. The child was deposited in boarding schools, first the Brentwood School in California, later the Institut at Monte Rosa in Montreux, Switzerland. The rule of motherhood in the Dietrich household was not neglect in the conventional sense. It was a philosophy inherited from Wilhelmina: discipline, resilience, the suppression of overt emotional display. Dietrich wrote to Maria constantly, hundreds of letters over decades, full of instruction, expectation, medical advice, fashion criticism, and a longing rarely stated directly but pulsing beneath every line. She was not absent emotionally. She was absent physically, in the daily, ordinary sense that matters most to a child. The absence was the direct cost of the career. The apparatus required the separation. A child on set was a scheduling problem, an insurance liability. A child in gossip columns was a scandal risk. So the child was institutionalized, shaped, protected, educated, kept safely out of the frame. The complication emerged when Maria grew up. She became an actress, a move Dietrich alternately encouraged and undermined. She married William Riva in 1947. They had 4 sons: Michael, Peter, Paul, David. Dietrich embraced the grandmother role with genuine affection, but on terms she dictated. She was competitive with Maria in painful ways, criticizing her acting, her weight, her mothering. She interfered in the Riva marriage. The psychological mechanism is not mysterious. A woman who sacrificed ordinary domestic life for a global career will sometimes demand the career validate the sacrifice absolutely. If Maria succeeded, the sacrifice was retroactively justified. If Maria was merely adequate, the sacrifice might face devastating reevaluation. Dietrich pushed her daughter toward the profession and resented her for entering it, for not being grateful enough, for being living evidence of a maternal absence that could never be repaired. The apparatus of stardom had deformed the channels of maternal feeling. Dietrich could not simply be a mother. She had to be Marlene Dietrich, mother of a role with a script and lighting requirements. The supporting cast performed according to direction they never agreed to receive. What Maria knew and what Dietrich knew Maria knew was the truth of the marriage, the lovers, the financial arrangements. The child had grown up entirely inside the silence. She had observed her mother's lovers. She had eaten dinner with her father and Tamara Mattel in the Valley House. She understood the unspoken rules more thoroughly than any biographer. In 1992, months after her mother's death, Maria published Marlene Dietrich *. It was a document of extraordinary, wounded candor. She wrote about the affairs, the boarding schools, the emotional distance, the competitiveness, the financial control. She broke the rule of silence with a completeness that was either filial betrayal or liberation, depending on your perspective. In doing so, she revealed the full intergenerational cost. Dietrich protected the image. The image protected the career. The career required the separation. The separation wounded the child. The adult child, now in her late 60s, wrote the story. The apparatus completed its cycle. The mother who could not speak was spoken for by the daughter who finally could. The exit from Dietrich's arrangement was never going to be a divorce. She did not divorce Sieber. The marriage served too many structural purposes: tax implications, property arrangements, the legal architecture of the family trust. The exit was something more existential, the attempt to leave the apparatus of stardom without being destroyed by the departure. The rule of exit stated, you may stop being a star when the public decides it is finished with you. You may not decide on your own. She attempted exits at several junctures. The first was the late 1940s, after the war, after the Medal of Freedom. She was in her late 40s. The studio system was contracting under antitrust rulings and television. Her box office appeal waned. She was no longer the exotic discovery of 1930. She was a middle-aged woman in an industry with no framework for middle-aged women except character parts and retirement. She tried radio. She tried character parts, a sharp performance in Billy Wilder's *Witness for the Prosecution* 1957, a collaboration with Orson Welles on *Touch of Evil* 1958. But the apparatus had no further use for a woman of her age when the market wanted Marilyn Monroe, Grace Kelly, Doris Day. She was, briefly, a woman without a function. The rule of exit threatened to strand her in the anteroom of has-beens. She refused. She went to Las Vegas. The Vegas years were an exit from cinema, an entry into something more grueling. She was now a live performer, alone on stage before audiences who paid to see the legend in person. The rule of exit in the nightclub circuit was blunt: perform until the audience stops paying. They paid for over 20 years. She debuted at the Sahara in 1953, breaking attendance records. She played the Sands, the Riviera, the Café de Paris in London. World Tours: Australia 1965, Russia 1964, Israel 1966. The work was punishing in ways cinema never was. No second takes. The costumes were heavy. The travel constant. The exits from the stage were always temporary, always conditional. She always returned, because returning proved the apparatus had not yet finished with her. The final exit was not voluntary. In September 1975, age 73, performing in Sydney, she fell. The femur fractured. Recovery was slow, complicated by age, circulatory disorder, decades of chemical management. The stage was no longer possible. She retreated to the Paris apartment at 12 Avenue Montaigne. Public performances ended in 1976. She made one final film appearance Just a Gigolo in 1978, directed by David Hemmings, opposite David Bowie. The production was chaotic. She was visibly ill. The film was a critical and commercial disaster, a shabby failure that confirmed every suspicion about actresses who outlived their era. The rule of exit demanded one last ritual humiliation. The reviews were merciless. She retreated permanently. The last 15 years were spent in the Avenue Montaigne apartment. The curtains were usually drawn. She read voraciously history, biography, Goethe in the original. She corresponded in a hand growing progressively more spidery. She received a small circle of visitors, old friends, former lovers, her daughter, her grandsons. She was, by their accounts, deeply depressed, often bored, still possessed of an intelligence that had not dimmed. The rule of exit had a bitter afterword: invisibility. The public was not to witness the diminishment. The apparatus required a clean final image. Marlene Dietrich, frozen in 1935, under a von Sternberg key light, forever 34. The real woman, in her 80s, bedridden after strokes, white hair undyed, face unmodified, was a secret. Maximilian Schell approached her for a documentary. She agreed on one condition: she would not appear on camera. Marlene 1984 is a film about a voice. She gave Schell hours of audio acerbic, evasive, sometimes furious, occasionally tender. The voice was still extraordinary. The body was not to be witnessed. The rule of appearance held to the absolute end. She was not permitted a public old age. She was permitted a legend. The legend was a photograph that could not age. The woman could. So the woman disappeared behind curtains on the Avenue Montaigne, and the legend remained, polished and untouchable, in the dark of the cinema. The apparatus that enclosed Marlene Dietrich was composed of many rules, each interlocking with the others. The rule of entry demanded she become a fantasy, altering her body and history until suitable for display. The rule of silence demanded she bury the cost so deeply even she might forget it. The rule of loyalty demanded she protect the structures that exploited her: the marriage, the studio, the military narrative, regardless of what they extracted. The rule of appearance demanded she perform in vulnerability, glamour, and gratitude without intermission. The rule of money demanded she generate immense wealth she could not keep or control. The rule of motherhood demanded she sacrifice the child to the career and the career to the child, satisfying neither, haunted by a domestic life she never lived. The rule of exit demanded she vanish on cue, quietly, leaving only the image for the apparatus to continue monetizing. None of these individual rules broke her. She was too disciplined, too contemptuous of self-pity, too much a product of that Schöneberg household where complaint was a failure of character. But there was one rule that contradicted all the others, that rendered simultaneous fulfillment impossible, and it is the rule that finally exhausted her. It was never written down. It operated silently in every contract, every headline, every love affair, every performance. It was this, asterisk, you must be extraordinary. You must also be ordinary. A goddess and a housewife. Sexually available and maternally pure. Self-sufficient and financially dependent on the men who manage your affairs. A German who repudiates Germany and an American forever European. A patriot who served on the front lines and a glamour icon who never let the mud show. A working woman who never stopped laboring and a woman who never neglected her child. Everything to everyone, simultaneously, without contradiction and never, not for a single moment, let the contradictions show. Asterisk, this was the rule that broke her. Not because she failed. She succeeded so completely that the success became the prison. She played the goddess in asterisk Morocco asterisk and the soldier's comrade in the Ardennes. The devoted wife sharing Christmas dinners with her husband and his mistress. The passionate lover to men and women who experienced her intensity and then her distance because intimacy threatened the performance, and the performance could not be threatened. The grateful star in 1,000 interviews, deflecting with wit and self-deprecation. The commanding perfectionist on set, demanding take after take until the light was right. The mother writing hundreds of letters full of longing and veiled reproach to a daughter placed in institutions because the career would not accommodate a child. She played them all simultaneously, without a break, for 60 years. The cost was a life lived in permanent performance, requiring a regime of self-surveillance so granular it became autonomic. Every gesture measured before it was made. Every interview managed before the first question. Every photograph controlled lighting, angle, expression, the narrative it would tell. The woman who existed for the camera became inseparable from the camera's subject. She could not find the off switch because it had been removed in Berlin in 1930. When she signed a contract she did not fully understand and became a commodity she could never fully own. In the Paris apartment during those final years, the curtains remained drawn. The telephone sat silent. The costumes, the swan coat, the top hat, the bias gut gowns hung in climate-controlled storage, preserved better than the body that had worn them. The lighting gels sat in trunks, unused. The apparatus had extracted what it wanted and left behind a woman in her late 80s, in a narrow bed, trying to reach through the accumulated strata of performance to find Maria Magdalene, the serious girl from Chernihiv who had practiced violin until her wrists ached and who had dreamed, before all the other dreams were imposed on her, of playing music in a concert hall. She had been Marlene Dietrich for so long that the girl was a stranger whose face she could barely recall. The rule of being everything to everyone had taken everything. There was no one left to be for herself. The performance had consumed the performer. She died on May 6, 1992, in the Paris apartment, age 90. Renal failure. The obituaries appeared in every major newspaper. They celebrated the legend. They reprinted the photographs, the top hat, the tuxedo, the cheekbones lit like a cathedral. They mentioned the films and the war work and the Medal of Freedom. Very few mentioned the financial arrangements, the legal guardianship that diverted her earnings. Very few mentioned the decades of grinding labor on the nightclub circuit. Very few mentioned the hollowing discipline of the image, maintained at the cost of insomnia and alcohol and pills. Very few mentioned the silence about the marriage, the lovers, Bergen-Belsen. Very few mentioned the daughter placed in boarding schools at age 5 who would, that same year, publish a biography cracking open every silence her mother kept. Because mentioning these things would have been impolite. Because the apparatus does not critique itself. Because the unspoken rule governing all the others, the meta-rule, is that we do not speak of the rules. We call her glamorous, tragic, complicated, an icon, a legend. We do not call her what she was, a woman never told the terms of her own contract, who figured them out through trial and error and loss, who mastered them with a ferocity still breathtaking to witness, and who paid for that mastery with a life she never fully owned and a self she could never recover. She was not weak. She was not foolish. She was not a victim in the usual sense. She was one of the most intelligent, durable, self-created artists of the 20th century. And the system won. Not because it was stronger, she was tremendously strong. The system won because it was older, ambient, as difficult to perceive as air. It was the stage she walked on, the contract she signed, the silence she kept, the husband she never divorced, the money she never controlled, the daughter she could never quite reach. The apparatus was the entertainment industry, the tax code, the institution of marriage as legally constructed, the cult of motherhood as socially enforced, the propaganda machinery of the state, and the expectation so ubiquitous it was never stated that a woman must function as a mirror for the desires of others, reflecting what they wanted and never asking to be seen herself. The apparatus did not hate her. It did not conspire. It simply used her efficiently for as long as she was useful. When she was no longer useful, when the body failed and the bookings evaporated, it told her she was a legend, which is a word reserved for women we have finished consuming but wish to continue displaying. Now you see the rules. They did not dissolve in 1992. They evolved, adopting softer language, adjusting their presentation. But the underlying architecture, the assumption that a woman's labor is a family asset, that her body is a public text to be evaluated, that her silence about the cost of performance is grace, that she must be everything to everyone and never let the contradictions show that architecture is still standing. The apparatus is still operating, in different forms, in different industries, in different households. Women inside it are still managing the contradictions, still performing gratitude, still paying for mastery with portions of their lives they will never retrieve. You recognize the machinery now. That is the purpose. You cannot unsee it. That is the work.